Global sustainability reporting is converging rapidly. Standards like IFRS S1 and S2 have created a shared global baseline for climate disclosures. But this creates a dangerous misconception: the belief that using the correct reporting template automatically guarantees the reliability of the underlying claim. But a clean template cannot fix a broken reality. Apply standardized headings to fragmented, untraceable supply chains, and the illusion of uniformity collapses. Standardizing what a company says doesn't dictate what happens when the statement is false. A template is not a truth serum. Disclosure reliability is an institutional outcome. It is produced by the surrounding accountability architecture, the legal and procedural mechanisms that back up the text. Because of this gap between standard text and institutional reality, downstream buyers and regulators view formally compliant ESG claims as high-risk legal liabilities. To evaluate these claims accurately, we need to separate three distinct concepts: verifiability, reliability, and credibility. Verifiability is an epistemic property. It simply asks whether a specific claim can be checked using reasonable evidence and methods. Reliability is a decision property. It asks whether a user, like an investor or a supply chain partner, is justified in basing a financial contract on that claim, given the preparer's incentives. Credibility is an institutional property. It asks whether the surrounding legal system makes falsifying the claim so costly that relying on it becomes a rational choice. Look at this stark boundary between tropical canopy and deforested earth. In these landscapes, tracing Scope 3 emissions makes verifiability structurally expensive and nearly impossible. When direct verification is economically impossible, the institutional credibility of the disclosure channel becomes the only rational basis for trusting the data. This brings us to the core unit of analysis for evaluating any ESG claim: the accountability channel. This is the specific institutional pathway that links a public statement to a real-world consequence. This channel is governed by a strict mathematical deterrence logic. As this equation shows, the credibility of a claim is approximately equal to the perceived probability of scrutiny, multiplied by the expected consequence of a misstatement, all divided by the time it takes to reach a resolution. We can translate this math into observable market proxies. Time to resolution is the channel's tempo, probability is its visibility to the market, and the expected consequence is its remedial bite. To build a channel that actually scores well on those metrics, a jurisdiction needs four constituent elements: vehicles, actors, pathways, and sanctions. Vehicles are the hard legal mediums that anchor the claim, such as statutory filings or mandatory listing rules. Purely voluntary statements score 0 here because they lack a binding anchor. Actors are the institutions verifying and supervising the claims. They require observable operational capacity and enforceable independence constraints, rather than just a theoretical mandate written in a statute. A jurisdiction can design perfect legal vehicles and appoint highly competent actors, but the entire system remains useless if the final two pillars, the mechanisms for challenge and consequence, fail to activate. Pathways are the specific procedures through which claims are challenged. In the global ESG disclosure landscape, this is the ultimate bottleneck. The most critical pathway is evidence access. Without explicit audit rights, document production authority, or protected whistleblower channels, external contestation is functionally impossible. Attempting to challenge a corporate ESG claim without access to the underlying raw data is merely performance art. It lacks the legal leverage required to force a change. The final pillar is sanctions. Here, we must contrast the theoretical statutory maximums written on paper with the actual, observable, activated bite demonstrated in the market over a recent period. This reveals a counterintuitive reality about consequence. Rapid, forced public corrections, like mandatory restatements that immediately force the market to reprice an asset, are far more effective at disciplining behavior than delayed, massive punitive fines. If a compliance system lacks a mechanism for external challengers to access evidence, or lacks the authority to force an immediate public correction, its credibility for reliance is practically 0. We can stress test this framework by comparing two jurisdictions that have both adopted the exact same ISSB-aligned climate reporting standards for listed issuers. Look at Singapore. This jurisdiction embeds sustainability reporting directly into its exchange's continuing listing obligations. Because this architecture is exchange-centered, it leans heavily on rapid administrative queries and supervisory signaling. This design explicitly prioritizes high-tempo and immediate remedial bite to maintain market hygiene. Contrast that with Thailand. Here, the disclosure requirements are integrated deep into the statutory 56-1 report filing architecture. While this statutory embedding might increase the severity of consequences in the long term, Thailand's use of phased transition reliefs temporarily lowers procedural speed and boundary clarity for external users today. Yet both channels share a critical vulnerability. They currently suffer from low evidence access for external challengers attempting to verify the underlying corporate data. This proves that identical standard compliance produces entirely different risk profiles depending on the domestic architecture. Standard alignment alone is an insufficient basis for due diligence. This institutional variance is now an immediate, high-stakes problem for downstream buyers, driven by the aggressive expansion of transnational supply chain regulations. Legislative frameworks like the EU Deforestation Regulation, or EUDR, and the Corporate Sustainability Due Diligence Directive, known as CSDDD, require strict value chain risk management. These downstream regimes forcibly convert upstream ESG claims, which previously felt voluntary or marketing-driven, into hard, actionable compliance and legal liability variables for global buyers. When a domestic public accountability channel is deemed too weak to trust, the market reacts rationally. Counterparties substitute public reliance with private ordering. Buyers construct private microchannels through their supplier contracts. They demand their own direct audit rights, strict data sharing covenants, and step-in rights to force corrective action. But this private substitution creates a toxic systemic side effect: audit saturation. Upstream small and medium enterprises face a barrage of overlapping extractive paperwork demands that bloat compliance costs without proportionally improving actual control. A failure to build credible public accountability infrastructure inevitably forces the market into this expensive, chaotic, and privatized verification bloat. For professionals navigating this environment, the template fallacy requires an immediate shift in due diligence strategy. Stop treating your verification budget as a blanket requirement. Start treating it as a surgical instrument. Use the vehicle, actor, pathway, and sanction framework to explicitly map the domestic accountability channel of your upstream suppliers. Locate the specific institutional gap in that jurisdiction. In most cases, you will find that the weakest link is the lack of third-party evidence access. Draft private contractual controls only to bridge that specific identified weakness. Avoid layering redundant, costly audits where the public channels are already legally robust. ESG credibility cannot be imported through a standardized global template. It is hard infrastructure, and it must be mapped, tested, and deliberately built.